You guys have sent us a ton of articles,
Right.
and it seems like the experts are all over the place. Some say boom time's ahead.
Right.
Some are saying there's a correction coming, and then everything in between.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to think.
Yeah, and you want us to try to make sense of it. I'll cut through the noise, right?
Exactly.
We've got a Newsweek piece here featuring this really, really bullish real estate expert.
Oh, wow.
Then we've got some insights on how the recent election might impact things from a policy standpoint.
Okay.
And then there's this House Beautiful article where they've got a bunch of experts debating whether it even makes sense to buy a home right after an election.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah, a lot to unpack.
Yeah, a lot of different perspectives for sure.
So why don't we just jump right in with that Newsweek article?
Okay, sounds good.
It focuses on this guy, Ryan Serhant, who's predicting a roaring housing market in 2025.
Roaring.
Okay. Yeah, he points to things like rising inventory interest rates hitting a 20-month low and expectations that those rates will drop even further to 5% or even 4%.
Wow, some people must be getting pretty excited about that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But I think what's interesting is that those low rates are only low compared to what we've seen really recently.
Right.
I mean, we're still a lot higher than we were just a few years ago.
That's true.
And higher rates mean higher monthly payments, right?
Yeah, and that could definitely price out a lot of potential buyers.
For sure. And then there's the whole issue of the median home price,
Yeah.
which is sitting at a whopping $432,000, according to Redfin.
Oof, it's not easy for most folks.
Not at all. It really makes you wonder, who can actually afford to participate in this roaring market Serhant's talking about?
Right, exactly. That's where the affordability piece comes in.
Hmm.
Even if you can somehow manage the monthly payments, coming up with a down payment at these prices is a huge barrier for a lot of people.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a ton of cash up front.
It is. And there's this financial literacy instructor named Alex Bean, quoted in the Newsweek article.
Okay.
And he makes a really good point about that down payment hurdle.
What does he say?
Well, he basically says even if you can swing the monthly payment, coming up with a down payment at these prices is a huge hurdle for many Americans.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then we have Danielle Hale, the chief economist at Realtor.com.
Okay.
And she's worried about how housing costs are outpacing incomes.
Oh, that's a big one.
Right. If that gap keeps widening, it could spell trouble.
Definitely. So it sounds like the situation might not be as rosy as Serhant makes it out to be.
Yeah, there are definitely some counterpoints to consider.
For sure. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about the election.
Okay.
Does a new president automatically mean big changes for the housing market?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
According to Mackenzie Ryan from Douglas Elliman in that House Beautiful article, historically, elections haven't caused immediate huge shifts in the market.
Interesting. So no instant earthquake.
Right. But she does say there's usually some kind of psychological impact.
Oh, how so?
Well, for example, she noticed a surge in offers right after this last election.
Really?
Yeah, and she thinks it was probably driven by those falling mortgage rates we were talking about earlier.
So like a little tremor maybe?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like people suddenly feel like they understand the lay of the land and they're ready to make a move.
Interesting. I'm also curious about this idea of political sorting that the article mentioned.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating.
People choosing where to live based on their political leanings.
It's a real thing. Take Florida, for instance.
Okay.
It's been attracting a lot of conservatives lately.
Really? Why is that?
Well, they're drawn to the lifestyle.
The beach is the sunshine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also the booming real estate market and the fact that Florida has no state income tax.
Oh, wow. So their moving there is actually driving up demand.
It is, which, as we've discussed, impacts prices.
Right. So it's like people are voting with their moving vans in a way.
You could say that it adds a whole other layer to this whole housing market puzzle.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, but now let's get into the policies that might be coming down the pike now that the election is over.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
I know, right? And our excerpt really dives into this.
Let's start with taxes.
Okay, good place to start.
Depending on what happens, we could see policies that either boost disposable income.
Which could lead to even more demand for housing?
Exactly. Or we could see policies that benefit real estate investors.
Which could push prices up even higher.
Right, making it harder for the average buyer.
Yeah, so a potential double-edged sword there.
Definitely.
Are there any policies that could actually make housing more affordable, though?
Well, the excerpt mentions the possibility of some housing supply initiatives. Like building more affordable housing.
Oh, okay.
If that happens, it could help balance the market by giving first-time buyers and renters more options.
Okay, so that could be a game changer, but it all depends on which specific policies get put into place. What about the impact on developers?
Ah, yes.
Could we see a building boom under the new administration?
Well, Trump has historically been pro-deregulation.
Right.
So if he keeps that up, it could lead to relaxed rules for developers,
Which could mean,
more housing development, especially in suburban and rural areas,
and that could help ease the supply crunch and maybe bring prices down a bit?
potentially. So yeah, policy decisions could have a huge swing effect here.
Okay, so we've got these policy decisions hanging in the balance. And, of course, we can't forget about the overall economic climate.
Right. How does that factor into all of this?
Well, when people feel good about the economy and their jobs, they're more likely to make big investments, like buying a home.
That makes sense.
So if, let's say, Trump's policies or any other policies lead to economic growth and more jobs, we could see demand for housing go way up.
And that would probably drive prices up even more in markets that are already really competitive.
Yeah, that's a bit of a mixed bag, especially for first-time buyers who are hoping for a break.
For sure. But what if the economic outlook isn't so great?
Right. What then?
Well, imagine a scenario with a lot of economic uncertainty.
Okay.
Maybe worries about inflation or trade wars or even political instability.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good.
In that kind of environment, buyers are going to get a lot more cautious. Demand could soften, and we might even see prices stabilize or drop in some areas.
Wow, so the economy is kind of a wild card.
It really is. It all boils down to how people feel about the future.
So much uncertainty.
There is. But you know what? Before we get into the arguments for and against a potential market correction,
Okay.
I think we should give our listeners a chance to process everything we've talked about so far.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in. We've got these conflicting expert opinions,
Yeah.
the subtle influence of the election, the potential policy shifts all brewing.
And that unpredictable economic outlook.
Exactly. So everyone take a deep breath.
Yeah.
And when we come back, we'll dive into those arguments for both a market dip and continued stability.
Yes.
Stay with us. All right, so we've talked about some of the big forces shaping the housing market. But now let's zoom in on the arguments for a potential correction.
Okay.
You know, that idea that things could cool down and maybe even see prices dip.
Right. Well, one of the biggest red flags is affordability.
Yeah, we touched on that earlier.
In a lot of areas, home prices have just been rising way faster than wages. And if that keeps happening, especially if interest rates start going up,
Yeah,
fewer and fewer people will be able to afford to buy homes.
that makes sense. Less buying power means less demand,
Right.
which would definitely put downward pressure on prices.
Exactly.
So are there any signs that that's already starting to happen?
Well, the excerpt we have mentions that inventory is starting to go up in some parts of the country.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that suggests that demand might be softening a bit.
Okay, I see.
When you have more sellers competing for buyers,
Yeah,
they often have to lower their asking prices.
makes sense. So rising inventory could be like an early warning sign?
It could be. And then there's the historical perspective to consider.
Right. Real estate tends to move in cycles.
Exactly. We've had years of growth,
Ah,
so it's possible we're due for a downturn.
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So there are some valid reasons to be a little cautious.
Definitely.
But the sources we have also highlight some arguments for why the market might stay stable.
Right.
So what are those?
Well, one major factor is the millennial generation.
Okay.
They're hitting their prime home buying years right now.
Yeah, huge generation.
And that means continued demand for housing.
Mm.
Even if some millennials struggle with affordability,
Right.
there's still a huge pool of potential buyers.
So millennials could be the key to keeping the market going, even if things get a little bumpy.
Potentially. But you bring up a good point.
Yeah.
Their influx into the market could actually make the affordability problem worse, at least in the short term.
Exact.
More buyers competing for limited housing.
Could push prices up even more.
It's a delicate balance.
For sure. While millennial demand might prop up the market, it could also fuel those affordability worries.
Especially if supply doesn't increase.
Right. And speaking of supply,
Yeah.
that's another factor that points towards stability.
Okay.
Nationwide housing supply is still pretty low compared to demand.
It is, and that's been driving those high prices we've been talking about.
Right. So until that gap closes,
Yeah,
it's unlikely we'll see a big drop in prices across the board.
I agree. Low supply acts as a kind of safety net.
Okay. So are there any other factors that could help stabilize things?
Well, we can't forget about the possibility of government intervention.
Right.
Both the Trump administration and the Federal Reserve have tools they can use to support the economy and the housing market if things start to go south.
Like what kinds of tools?
Well, they could do things like stimulus measures,
Okay.
or they could adjust interest rates, or
hmm
even implement policies specifically designed to boost demand for housing.
So a lot of potential options.
There are, of course, how effective those interventions would be and what the long-term consequences might be.
Yeah.
That's always up for debate.
Always. So it sounds like there are some potential safeguards in place,
There are.
but the future of the housing market is still pretty uncertain.
It is. A lot depends on those big picture factors we talked about earlier.
The interest rates,
Uh-huh.
the policy decisions,
Right.
the economic trends, even things like demographic shifts.
Like the rise of the millennial buyer.
Exactly. It's a lot to digest.
It is.
So for our listener who's trying to make sense of all of this, what are the key takeaways?
Good question.
How can they use this information to make decisions about their own housing situation, whether they're thinking about buying, selling, or investing?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's exactly what we're going to focus on in our final segment.
Okay, great.
We'll explore what all of this means for potential buyers, sellers, and investors. And we'll leave you with some food for thought to help you make the most informed decisions you can in this really dynamic and often unpredictable housing market.
Okay, sounds good.
So stay tuned.
All right, so we've explored all these different factors shaping the housing market: expert predictions, the election, potential policy shifts, the economy, and of course, those arguments for both a correction and continued stability. It's a lot.
It really is.
But our listener wants to know, what does it all mean for them?
Right, let's get practical. Let's say you're thinking about buying a home.
A big decision.
Huge, especially now with so much uncertainty.
So where do you even start?
Well, first, don't panic. Knowledge is power. Do your research, get pre-approved for a mortgage so you know what you can afford, and find a good real estate agent, someone who really understands your local market.
And remember those affordability concerns we talked about.
Absolutely. Be honest with yourself about what you can truly afford, both for the down payment and the monthly payments. Don't overstretch yourself, especially with interest rates being so unpredictable. A home should be a source of security, not financial stress.
Solid advice. What about if you're thinking of selling your home? Is now a good time to cash in, or should you wait?
If you're in a market with low inventory, it might be a good time to sell, but be realistic about your pricing and be ready to negotiate. Remember, the market could cool down, so flexibility is key. If you're not in a hurry, waiting to see how things play out could be a smart move.
So, bit of a gamble either way.
Yeah.
What about real estate as an investment? What should people be considering?
Real estate can be a great investment, but it's not a quick way to get rich. Do your homework, understand the market, and be in it for the long haul. And stay informed about potential policy changes, taxes, regulations, government programs. Those can have a big impact on your returns.
So buying, selling, investing. Staying informed is key. Any final words of wisdom as our listeners navigate this crazy housing market?
You know, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict the future. But by understanding those big forces we talked about, interest rates, the economy, policy decisions, even demographics, you can make smart choices for your situation.
Don't let fear or hype make your decisions for you.
Exactly. Be thoughtful, be strategic. This is a marathon, not a sprint.
Fantastic advice. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive into the U.S. housing market. It's been eye-opening, even if the future's a little unclear.
My pleasure. It's always a fascinating topic.
And to our listeners, keep learning, stay curious, stay informed, and make the best choices for your own housing journey. Until next time.